The morning of October 12, 1944, brought a crimson dawn to the waters off Leyte Gulf, and with it came the shriek of diving engines that would haunt Lieutenant Commander Thaddeus Meridian for the rest of his life. Standing on the bridge of the destroyer USS Caldwell, he watched through salt-stained binoculars as 3 Japanese aircraft plummeted toward his ship in perfect suicide formation, their engines screaming like banshees against the Pacific wind. The standard naval doctrine demanded he follow established anti-aircraft protocols, maintain formation discipline, and trust in the coordinated defense grid that had served the Navy well in conventional battles. But conventional battles didn't prepare anyone for pilots who viewed death as victory, and Meridian knew that following orders would mean watching good men die in the next 60 seconds. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for the ship's intercom, knowing that what he was about to command would either save his crew or end his naval career. The metallic taste of fear mixed with the smell of cordite and sea spray, as he made a choice that would defy 3 decades of naval tradition and rewrite the entire Pacific Fleet's approach to defending against the most desperate weapon in military history. No one in the 7th Fleet knew that one man's defiance that morning would expose the fatal flaw in Japan's most feared strategy and ultimately render the kamikaze threat obsolete within 6 months. Lieutenant Commander Thaddeus Meridian had grown up in the wheat fields of Nebraska, far from any ocean, where the horizon stretched endlessly in all directions, and the only sounds were wind through grain and the distant whistle of trains carrying crops to distant markets. Born in 1908 to a family of farmers who had worked the same land for 3 generations, Meridian possessed the methodical patience that came from watching seasons change and understanding that timing meant everything. His father, Ezra, had served briefly in the Great War as a supply sergeant, returning home with stories of military efficiency and a deep respect for following orders that he passed on to his son. Meridian's childhood was marked by early mornings, hard work, and an insatiable curiosity about how things functioned, particularly the mechanical contraptions that were beginning to transform American agriculture. He spent hours dismantling and rebuilding farm equipment, developing an intuitive understanding of mechanical systems that would serve him well decades later when facing the most sophisticated weapons of war. His teachers at the local schoolhouse noticed his exceptional ability to visualize complex problems and find unconventional solutions, often suggesting approaches that worked better than established methods. When the Great Depression struck in 1929, Meridian watched his family struggle to keep their farm, and he made the decision to seek opportunity beyond the endless plains of his childhood. The Naval Academy offered education, purpose, and a chance to serve something larger than himself, though he never imagined that his farming instincts for reading weather patterns and mechanical systems would one day prove crucial in battles fought thousands of miles from Nebraska soil. Meridian's entry into the United States Naval Academy in 1926 placed him among young men from coastal cities who had grown up around ships and harbors, making him feel like an outsider among those who seemed born to maritime service. His classmates often joked about the farm boy who had never seen the ocean until his first day at Annapolis. But Meridian's work ethic and analytical mind quickly earned respect from both peers and instructors. He excelled in navigation and mechanical engineering, demonstrating an unusual ability to understand the interconnected systems that made naval vessels function as unified fighting platforms. His professors noted his tendency to question established procedures, not from arrogance but from genuine curiosity about whether existing methods represented the most effective approaches. During summer training cruises, Meridian spent extra hours learning radar and communication systems, fascinated by the emerging technologies that were transforming naval warfare. His graduation in 1930 placed him in the middle of his class academically, but his practical skills and innovative thinking had already caught the attention of several senior officers. His first assignment aboard the cruiser USS Indianapolis introduced him to the realities of naval life, where following orders and maintaining discipline formed the foundation of military effectiveness. However, even as a junior officer, Meridian demonstrated a pattern of finding creative solutions to routine problems, often discovering more efficient ways to accomplish standard tasks. His captain, Commander Harrison Blackthorne, recognized Meridian's potential and encouraged his analytical approach while emphasizing the importance of naval tradition and chain of command. Those early years taught Meridian to balance innovation with discipline, a skill that would prove essential when facing threats that no naval tradition had anticipated. The 1930s brought Meridian steady promotion and increasing responsibility as the United States Navy modernized in response to growing global tensions. His assignment to destroyer duty in 1936 placed him aboard the USS Hamon, where he served as gunnery officer and gained extensive experience with anti-aircraft systems that were becoming increasingly important as aviation technology advanced. Meridian's natural mechanical aptitude made him an expert in radar-guided fire control systems, and he spent countless hours studying their capabilities and limitations. He developed an almost intuitive understanding of how radar signatures behaved under different atmospheric conditions and began to recognize patterns that escaped other operators. His commanding officer, Captain Rutherford Ashworth, valued Meridian's technical expertise, but sometimes worried about his tendency to experiment with unauthorized modifications to standard equipment. During fleet exercises in the late 1930s, Meridian repeatedly demonstrated that minor adjustments to radar calibration and firing solutions could significantly improve accuracy. But naval regulations strictly prohibited such modifications without official approval. His requests for permission to test improved targeting methods were consistently denied by fleet headquarters, which maintained that standardized procedures ensured reliability across all vessels. This bureaucratic resistance frustrated Meridian, who could see clear opportunities to enhance defensive capabilities, but he learned to work within the system while continuing his private research into radar technology. His reputation as a technically gifted officer with unconventional ideas spread throughout the destroyer fleet, earning him both admirers and skeptics among his fellow officers. By 1941, Meridian had been promoted to lieutenant commander and given command of his own destroyer, the USS Caldwell, a position that would allow him to implement his ideas when the right moment arrived. He had no idea that war with Japan would provide that moment sooner than anyone expected. The attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, transformed Meridian from a peacetime officer with theoretical ideas into a combat commander facing life-and-death decisions. The USS Caldwell was conducting training exercises off the California coast when news of the surprise attack reached the Pacific Fleet, and Meridian felt the same combination of shock, anger, and determination that swept through every American military unit. The immediate deployment to the Western Pacific brought his first taste of real combat during the early desperate months of 1942, when American forces struggled to contain Japanese expansion across the Pacific. Meridian's first engagement with enemy aircraft occurred during the Battle of the Coral Sea in May 1942, where his ship served as part of the screening force protecting aircraft carriers from air attack. The experience of watching Japanese dive bombers and torpedo planes attack with precise coordination and apparent disregard for their own safety provided his first glimpse of the Japanese military mindset that would later manifest in kamikaze tactics. His crew's performance during the battle earned commendations from Fleet Command, but Meridian remained troubled by how close the enemy had come to achieving devastating results despite American technical advantages. The months that followed brought a series of engagements across the Pacific, each one teaching Meridian more about Japanese tactical approaches and the limitations of American defensive systems. He began to notice that Japanese pilots displayed unusual persistence in their attacks, often continuing to press home their assaults even when facing overwhelming defensive fire. This observation led him to study enemy tactics more carefully, looking for patterns that might predict future developments in Japanese strategy. The broader context of the Pacific War during 1943 and early 1944 revealed the desperate situation facing the Japanese Empire as American industrial might begin to assert its dominance across the vast ocean theater. Following decisive defeats at Midway and Guadalcanal, Japanese forces found themselves increasingly outnumbered and outgunned by American forces that grew stronger with each passing month. The Japanese Navy, once the master of the Pacific, had lost many of its most experienced pilots and could no longer replace them fast enough to maintain qualitative superiority over American aviators. Japanese aircraft production, hampered by resource shortages and bombing raids on the home islands, struggled to match American output that was turning out thousands of new planes each month. The strategic situation for Japan had become increasingly hopeless by mid-1944, as American forces advanced steadily across the Central Pacific in a series of amphibious assaults that captured key island bases and brought the war closer to Japan itself. Military leaders in Tokyo faced a stark choice between surrender and escalating to increasingly desperate measures that might inflict enough casualties on American forces to negotiate a more favorable peace settlement. The traditional Japanese military culture, with its emphasis on honor, duty, and death before dishonor, provided a philosophical framework that could justify extreme measures in service of the emperor and the nation. Admiral Takejiro Onishi, commander of the 1st Air Fleet in the Philippines, began developing plans for organized suicide attacks that would maximize the psychological and material impact of Japan's dwindling air forces. The concept of deliberate self-sacrifice in war was not new to Japanese military tradition, but the systematic organization of suicide attacks represented a fundamental shift in tactics that would challenge every assumption about aerial combat that American forces had developed over 3 years of war. The emergence of organized kamikaze attacks in October 1944 caught American naval forces completely unprepared for an enemy that viewed successful suicide as the ultimate military achievement. The first systematic kamikaze assault occurred during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, when Japanese pilots deliberately crashed their aircraft into American ships with devastating effect, sinking several vessels and causing thousands of casualties. Traditional anti-aircraft tactics were designed to deter enemy pilots who wanted to survive their missions, but these assumptions collapsed when facing pilots who actively sought death as their primary objective. American gunners discovered that even severely damaged aircraft could continue their attack runs, since pilots who expected to die had no reason to break off their assaults to preserve their own lives. The psychological impact on American crews was immense, as they faced an enemy whose behavior violated every Western assumption about rational military conduct. Fleet commanders struggled to develop effective countermeasures against attacks that combined technological capability with absolute commitment to death, creating a tactical challenge unlike anything in military history. Standard defensive formations and fire patterns proved inadequate against attackers who would fly through heavy anti-aircraft fire without deviation, making accurate shooting extremely difficult for gunners trained to target pilots who would maneuver to avoid destruction. The speed and determination of kamikaze attacks left little time for the careful aiming and coordinated fire that characterized effective anti-aircraft defense under normal circumstances. American naval doctrine emphasized the importance of maintaining formation integrity and following established procedures, but these approaches were failing against an enemy whose tactics defied rational analysis. The casualty rates from early kamikaze attacks sent shockwaves through the Pacific Fleet command structure. As admirals realized they faced a threat that could potentially negate American numerical and technological advantages through sheer fanatical determination. Lieutenant Commander Meridian's first encounter with kamikaze tactics came during the initial assault on Leyte Gulf, when his destroyer found itself directly in the path of a coordinated suicide attack involving 12 Japanese aircraft approaching from multiple directions simultaneously. Standing on the bridge of the USS Caldwell as the enemy formation approached, Meridian watched his crew execute standard defensive procedures with professional precision, their anti-aircraft guns firing in carefully coordinated patterns designed to create overlapping fields of defensive fire. The established doctrine called for ships to maintain formation integrity while delivering maximum firepower against approaching aircraft, trusting in the mathematical probability that concentrated defensive fire would destroy enough attackers to protect the formation. However, as Meridian observed the approaching kamikaze pilots, he realized that conventional probability calculations were meaningless against pilots who had no intention of taking evasive action to preserve their own lives. The Japanese aircraft flew in perfectly straight lines toward their targets, their pilots making no effort to dodge the heavy anti-aircraft fire that would normally force attacking aircraft to maneuver and lose accuracy. This tactical inflexibility should have made the kamikaze planes easy targets for American gunners, but their unwavering approach meant that even minor damage would not deter them from completing their suicide missions. Meridian watched 3 of his crew's direct hits on enemy aircraft fail to stop their attacks, as damaged planes continued flying straight toward American ships despite having engines on fire and control surfaces shot away. The psychological effect on his gunners was immediately apparent, as they realized that their accurate shooting was not providing the protection they had been trained to expect from their weapon systems. The mathematical reality of kamikaze effectiveness became clear to Meridian as he analyzed the tactical situation unfolding around his ship during those desperate minutes of October 12th. Traditional anti-aircraft defense relied on the principle that enemy pilots would break off their attacks when faced with the prospect of certain death, allowing defensive gunfire to be effective through deterrence as much as direct destruction. However, kamikaze pilots actively sought death, which meant that deterrence was completely irrelevant, and only direct physical destruction of the attacking aircraft could prevent successful strikes. This fundamental shift in the tactical equation meant that American defensive fire had to achieve nearly 100% destruction rates against attacking formations, a mathematical impossibility given the accuracy limitations of World War II anti-aircraft weapons. Even the most accurate American gunners could only expect to destroy 60 to 70% of approaching aircraft under ideal conditions, leaving enough kamikaze attackers to inflict severe damage on defending ships. The coordinated nature of kamikaze attacks compounded this problem, as multiple aircraft approaching from different directions simultaneously could overwhelm even the most sophisticated defensive systems. Meridian realized that standard defensive tactics were not just inadequate, but actually counterproductive against suicide attackers, since the careful coordination required by established procedures consumed precious time that could be better spent on rapid, independent target engagement. The rigid formation discipline that characterized American naval tactics left ships vulnerable to coordinated suicide attacks by limiting their ability to maneuver independently and concentrate fire on the most dangerous threats. As he watched Japanese aircraft penetrate the formation's defensive perimeter despite heavy anti-aircraft fire, Meridian understood that surviving kamikaze attacks would require completely rethinking 3 decades of naval defensive doctrine. The immediate crisis facing the USS Caldwell demanded split-second decisions as 2 kamikaze aircraft broke through the formation's outer defensive ring and began their final approach toward Meridian's ship. Standard naval procedure required him to maintain his assigned position in the formation while contributing his ship's firepower to the coordinated defensive effort, trusting that the collective fire of all ships would provide adequate protection for the formation as a whole. However, Meridian could see that the mathematical realities of the situation made standard procedure a prescription for disaster, as the remaining Kamikaze aircraft would almost certainly penetrate the defensive fire and strike their intended targets. His radar operator, Petty Officer First Class Lysander Crowe, reported that the two approaching aircraft showed no signs of evasive maneuvering and would reach the ship in approximately 45 seconds at their current speed and trajectory. The ship's primary anti-aircraft weapons were already engaged with other targets as part of the coordinated defensive plan, leaving only secondary weapons available for engaging the immediate threat to Caldwell itself. Meridian's training and 3 years of combat experience told him to trust in the system and maintain discipline, but his analytical mind calculated that following standard procedure would result in at least one successful kamikaze strike on his ship within the next minute. The choice before him was stark: obey orders and watch his crew die, or violate fundamental naval doctrine to implement an untested tactical innovation that might save his ship. His hand hovered over the ship's intercom as he watched the approaching aircraft grow larger through his binoculars, their pilots visible in the cockpits as they prepared to die in service of their emperor. The decision he made in the next 10 seconds would either vindicate 3 years of unauthorized experimentation with radar-guided fire control or result in a court-martial that would end his naval career in disgrace. Meridian's decision to abandon formation discipline and implement his unauthorized tactical modifications came from his deep understanding of radar technology and his recognition that kamikaze attacks created a unique targeting opportunity that standard procedures failed to exploit. During his years of unauthorized experimentation with fire control systems, he had discovered that radar could predict the exact trajectory of non-maneuvering aircraft with remarkable precision, allowing defensive guns to be prepositioned for maximum accuracy. The key insight was that kamikaze pilots, unlike conventional attackers, would not deviate from their attack courses regardless of defensive fire, which meant their flight paths could be calculated mathematically and intercepted with devastating effectiveness. His modifications to the ship's radar systems allowed for rapid target acquisition and tracking that could guide defensive fire with precision far exceeding standard manual aiming techniques. The unauthorized software modifications he had installed during previous port calls enabled the radar system to automatically calculate interception points and provide firing solutions that required minimal human intervention. However, implementing this system required the ship to break formation and maneuver independently, which violated explicit fleet orders about maintaining defensive coordination. Meridian grabbed the intercom and issued commands that sent shockwaves through his crew. All stations, this is the captain. We are breaking formation and implementing emergency defensive protocol. Meridian 7. Gunnery control, switch to automated radar tracking immediately. Engine room, prepare for emergency maneuvering. All hands, prepare for violent evasive action. The bridge crew stared at him in stunned silence, knowing that he had just ordered them to violate direct fleet orders in the middle of combat. Chief Petty Officer Balthazar Finch, his senior enlisted advisor, stepped closer and spoke quietly. "Sir, Fleet Command will have your head for this." Meridian nodded grimly and replied, "They can have my head after we survive the next 2 minutes." The implementation of Meridian's unauthorized defensive system transformed the USS Caldwell from a ship following standard procedures into a precisely controlled weapon system that could engage kamikaze attackers with unprecedented accuracy. His radar modifications immediately locked onto the approaching Japanese aircraft and began calculating interception vectors that would place defensive fire directly in their flight paths. The automated fire control system eliminated the human reaction time that normally degraded anti-aircraft accuracy, allowing the ship's guns to track targets with mechanical precision that no human gunner could match. As the Caldwell broke formation and began independent maneuvering, Meridian's crew executed his unauthorized procedures with professional skill despite their confusion about violating established protocols. The ship's 5-inch guns swiveled to predetermined positions calculated by the modified radar system, while smaller anti-aircraft weapons prepared to engage targets according to computer-generated firing solutions. The first Kamikaze aircraft entered the engagement envelope exactly as Meridian's calculations had predicted, and the automated defensive fire began with devastating effect. The Japanese pilot, flying in a perfectly straight line toward his target, flew directly into a carefully positioned barrage of anti-aircraft fire that destroyed his aircraft before he could complete his suicide dive. The precision of the interception was so perfect that debris from the destroyed plane fell harmlessly into the ocean several hundred yards from the Caldwell, exactly where Meridian's calculations had predicted. The second Kamikaze pilot, apparently unaware of his comrade's destruction, continued his own suicide approach and met the same fate as the ship's automated systems tracked and destroyed his aircraft with mechanical efficiency. The entire engagement lasted less than 90 seconds, but in that brief time, Meridian had demonstrated that kamikaze attacks could be defeated through technological innovation and tactical flexibility. The immediate aftermath of Meridian's successful defense brought both congratulations from his relieved crew and urgent radio messages from Fleet Command demanding explanations for his unauthorized maneuvers. Admiral Chester Nimitz himself contacted the USS Caldwell directly to inquire about the ship's departure from formation and the apparent modification of standard defensive procedures. Meridian's response was characteristically direct. "Admiral, we engaged and destroyed 2 kamikaze aircraft using enhanced radar-guided fire control. Request permission to continue current defensive protocols." The radio silence that followed lasted nearly 5 minutes before Admiral Nimitz responded, "Commander Meridian, you will maintain current position and prepare for immediate inspection by fleet technical personnel. Your unauthorized modifications are to remain in place pending evaluation." The tone of the Admiral's voice suggested that Meridian's career hung in the balance, but the tactical results spoke for themselves. Other ships in the formation had suffered significant damage from kamikaze attacks during the same engagement, with the destroyer USS Abner Red taking a direct hit that killed 22 sailors and wounded dozens more. The cruiser USS Birmingham had been struck by 2 kamikaze aircraft and was barely staying afloat despite heroic damage control efforts by her crew. The stark contrast between the USS Caldwell's success and the casualties suffered by ships following standard procedures provided compelling evidence that Meridian's innovations offered significant advantages over established doctrine. His radar operator, Petty Officer Crow, reported that the modified tracking systems had performed flawlessly throughout the engagement, providing targeting data that exceeded the accuracy of manual fire control by more than 300%. The gunnery crews, who had initially been skeptical of the unauthorized modifications, now praised their effectiveness and requested additional training on the enhanced systems. The investigation into Meridian's tactical innovations brought a team of technical specialists and senior officers to the USS Caldwell within 24 hours of the successful engagement. Captain Theodore Armbruster, representing the Bureau of Ordnance, led a comprehensive examination of the modified radar and fire control systems that Meridian had installed without authorization. The technical evaluation revealed that Meridian's modifications represented a significant advance in anti-aircraft capability, but they also constituted serious violations of naval regulations regarding equipment modifications and tactical procedures. Captain Armbruster's preliminary report noted, "Commander Meridian's unauthorized modifications demonstrate remarkable technical innovation and tactical insight. However, the violation of established procedures raises serious questions about command discipline and fleet coordination. The report went on to document the specific improvements in targeting accuracy and reaction time that Meridian systems provided, including mathematical analysis that confirmed the enhanced effectiveness against non-maneuvering targets. The technical team discovered that Meridian had been conducting unauthorized experiments for more than 2 years, gradually refining his modifications through careful analysis of combat results and system performance. His personal notes revealed extensive calculations about kamikaze tactics and the theoretical advantages of automated fire control systems against suicide attackers. The investigation also uncovered communications between Meridian and several other destroyer commanders who had requested information about his modifications, but had been refused permission to implement similar systems by fleet headquarters. The bureaucratic resistance to innovation that Meridian had encountered provided context for his decision to act independently, but it did not excuse his violation of direct orders and naval regulations. The broader implications of Meridian's success became apparent as reports from other engagements confirmed the devastating effectiveness of kamikaze attacks against ships using standard defensive procedures. The USS Franklin, one of the Navy's most modern aircraft carriers, suffered catastrophic damage from 2 kamikaze hits that killed over 800 sailors and nearly sank the ship. The destroyer USS Luce was completely destroyed by a single kamikaze aircraft that penetrated its defensive fire and struck the ship's magazine, causing an explosion that killed nearly all hands. These losses, combined with similar casualties across the Pacific Fleet, created an urgent need for more effective countermeasures against suicide attacks. Fleet commanders recognized that traditional anti-aircraft tactics were inadequate against an enemy whose pilots actively sought death, but they also understood that abandoning established procedures could lead to chaos and confusion in large-scale naval operations. The tension between innovation and discipline created a dilemma that required careful balance between tactical effectiveness and operational coordination. Meridian's unauthorized modifications had proven effective, but implementing them fleet-wide would require extensive testing, training, and modification of existing equipment across hundreds of ships. The logistics of such a transformation seemed overwhelming, particularly while conducting active combat operations against an increasingly desperate enemy. However, the alternative was accepting casualty rates that could potentially cripple the Pacific Fleet's offensive capabilities and prolong the war indefinitely. Admiral Nimitz faced a decision that would determine whether innovation or tradition would guide American naval strategy for the remainder of the Pacific War. The strategic situation in late 1944 provided additional urgency to the question of how to counter kamikaze attacks effectively. Intelligence reports indicated that the Japanese military was organizing increasingly large-scale suicide attacks as American forces approached the Philippines and prepared for the eventual invasion of Japan itself. The success of early kamikaze operations had convinced Japanese leaders that organized suicide tactics might be their only hope of inflicting casualties severe enough to force the United States to negotiate a peace settlement. Plans were already underway to expand kamikaze operations from a few dozen aircraft to hundreds or even thousands of suicide attackers, potentially overwhelming American defensive capabilities through sheer numbers. The Japanese military's commitment to death before surrender meant that kamikaze tactics would only intensify as the war progressed, making the development of effective countermeasures a matter of national survival. American industrial capacity could replace lost ships and aircraft, but the human cost of continued kamikaze success threatened to undermine public support for the war and complicate post-war reconstruction efforts in the Pacific. The psychological impact of suicide attacks on American crews was already evident, as sailors reported increased stress and declining morale when facing an enemy whose behavior defied rational understanding. Medical officers documented rising rates of combat fatigue and psychological casualties among personnel who had survived kamikaze attacks, suggesting that the indirect effects of suicide tactics were compounding their direct military impact. The Japanese strategy appeared to be succeeding in its goal of making continued warfare so costly in human terms that American leaders might seek a negotiated settlement rather than pursue total victory. The decision to test Meridian's innovations on a broader scale came during a fleet commanders' conference aboard the USS Missouri on October 25, 1944. Admiral Nimitz had assembled his senior officers to discuss tactical responses to the escalating kamikaze threat and evaluate potential modifications to existing defensive doctrine. Captain Armbruster presented his technical evaluation of Meridian's modifications, emphasizing both their effectiveness and their violation of established procedures. The debate that followed revealed deep divisions among fleet commanders about the proper balance between innovation and discipline in military operations. Some senior officers argued that abandoning proven procedures in favor of untested innovations could lead to tactical confusion and operational failures that might prove more costly than the kamikaze threat itself. Others pointed to the mounting casualties from suicide attacks and insisted that dramatic changes in defensive tactics were essential for fleet survival. Meridian himself was called to present his case directly to the assembled admirals, a highly unusual circumstance that reflected the unprecedented nature of the tactical challenges facing the Pacific Fleet. His presentation focused on the mathematical realities of defending against non-maneuvering attackers and the potential for radar-guided systems to provide the precision necessary for effective interception. The technical data supporting his arguments was compelling, but several senior officers remained concerned about the broader implications of authorizing individual commanders to modify their equipment and tactics without higher approval. The discussion continued for several hours as admirals weighed the potential benefits of innovation against the risks of abandoning time-tested procedures that had served the Navy well throughout 3 years of war. Admiral William Bull Halsey emerged as the strongest supporter of implementing Meridian's modifications across the fleet, arguing that desperate times required bold solutions and that excessive adherence to peacetime procedures could prove fatal in combat against an enemy employing suicide tactics. His endorsement carried significant weight among the assembled commanders, as his aggressive leadership had contributed to numerous American victories across the Pacific. Halsey's argument that innovation was more important than tradition in combat situations resonated with younger officers who had experienced the limitations of standard procedures when facing kamikaze attacks. However, Admiral Raymond Spruance expressed concerns about the potential consequences of widespread equipment modifications and tactical changes implemented without extensive testing and training. His more cautious approach reflected the traditional naval emphasis on careful preparation and systematic implementation of new procedures to ensure reliability across large-scale operations. The debate highlighted fundamental differences in leadership philosophy between officers who prioritized aggressive innovation and those who emphasized careful planning and disciplined execution. Meridian found himself at the center of a discussion that would determine not only his own career but also the future direction of American naval tactics in the final phase of the Pacific War. His technical expertise and combat experience provided credibility for his arguments, but the broader questions about military discipline and command authority required resolution at the highest levels of naval leadership. The decision ultimately rested with Admiral Nimitz, who had to balance the immediate tactical advantages of Meridian's innovations against the long-term implications for naval organization and procedure. The compromise solution that emerged from the conference represented a careful balance between innovation and tradition that would allow testing of Meridian's modifications while maintaining overall fleet discipline and coordination. Admiral Nimitz authorized the formation of an experimental task force consisting of 12 destroyers and 4 cruisers that would implement enhanced radar-guided defensive systems under carefully controlled conditions. Meridian was placed in command of this experimental force with orders to develop standardized procedures that could be implemented fleet-wide if testing proved successful. The authorization came with strict conditions requiring detailed documentation of all modifications and regular reports on tactical effectiveness and operational reliability. The experimental task force would operate independently during kamikaze attacks to avoid compromising the defensive coordination of ships using standard procedures while maintaining communication with Fleet Command to provide real-time assessment of the new tactics. This arrangement allowed for innovation while limiting the potential risks to overall fleet operations, providing a framework for systematic evaluation of new defensive approaches. Meridian's promotion to full commander accompanied his new assignment, reflecting recognition of his technical achievements while acknowledging that his unauthorized modifications had violated naval regulations. The delicate balance between reward and discipline sent a clear message to other officers that innovation was valued but must be pursued through proper channels to maintain military order and effectiveness. The experimental program would provide the definitive test of whether radar-guided defensive systems could transform American capabilities against kamikaze attacks, or whether traditional procedures remained the most reliable foundation for naval operations. The implementation of Meridian's enhanced defensive systems across the experimental task force required intensive training and equipment modification over the following 6 weeks. Teams of technicians worked around the clock to install radar modifications and fire control enhancements on 16 ships, while crews received specialized training in the new defensive procedures. The complexity of the modifications challenged the technical capabilities of many ships, as the enhanced systems required precision calibration and careful maintenance to function effectively. Several vessels experienced equipment failures during initial testing, highlighting the risks associated with complex technological innovations implemented under combat conditions. However, the majority of ships successfully integrated the new systems and demonstrated significant improvements in targeting accuracy during practice exercises. Meridian supervised the training personally, traveling between ships to ensure that crews understood both the capabilities and limitations of the enhanced defensive systems. His emphasis on understanding the underlying principles of radar-guided fire control enabled crews to make real-time adjustments when equipment problems arose during combat operations. The training program also addressed the psychological aspects of facing kamikaze attacks, helping sailors understand that the new defensive systems provided genuine protection against suicide attackers rather than false confidence that might prove dangerous in actual combat. The comprehensive preparation paid dividends when the experimental task force encountered its first major kamikaze assault during the Battle of Luzon in January 1945. The Battle of Luzon provided the definitive test of Meridian's defensive innovations when his experimental task force faced the largest coordinated kamikaze attack of the Pacific War. On January 9, 1945, intelligence reports warned of an incoming assault involving more than 60 Japanese aircraft approaching the American invasion fleet in successive waves designed to overwhelm defensive capabilities through sheer numbers. The conventional ships in the fleet prepared for devastating casualties based on their experience with previous kamikaze attacks, while Meridian's experimental force implemented the enhanced defensive procedures that had been refined through months of training and preparation. The first wave of kamikaze attackers approached the fleet at dawn, their pilots flying in the characteristic straight-line formations that had proven so effective against conventional defensive fire. However, The radar-guided systems aboard Meridian's ships began tracking and engaging targets at ranges far exceeding standard anti-aircraft capabilities, creating a defensive envelope that destroyed incoming aircraft before they could pose a serious threat to the fleet. The precision of the automated fire control systems proved devastating against non-maneuvering targets, achieving destruction rates exceeding 90% against the first wave of attackers. The few kamikaze aircraft that survived the initial defensive fire found themselves facing concentrated secondary batteries that had been pre-positioned according to computer-calculated interception vectors. The mathematical precision of the enhanced defensive systems created a tactical situation that Japanese suicide tactics could not overcome, regardless of the pilots' determination to die for their emperor. Wave after wave of kamikaze attackers met the same fate as Meridian's defensive innovations systematically destroyed the largest suicide assault of the war. The tactical results of the Battle of Luzon demonstrated conclusively that radar-guided defensive systems could neutralize the kamikaze threat through technological superiority rather than simple firepower concentration. Ships using standard defensive procedures suffered significant casualties during the same engagement, with the carrier USS Ticonderoga taking multiple kamikaze hits that killed nearly 300 sailors and required months of repair work. In contrast, none of the vessels in Meridian's experimental task force suffered serious damage from suicide attacks, despite being targeted by more than 40 kamikaze aircraft during the 6-hour battle. The destruction rate achieved by the enhanced defensive systems reached 94%, a level of effectiveness that rendered kamikaze tactics tactically obsolete when facing properly equipped American ships. The psychological impact on both American and Japanese personnel was profound, as word spread that the once feared suicide attacks could be defeated through superior technology and tactical innovation. Japanese pilots reported increasing difficulty in achieving successful strikes against ships equipped with enhanced defensive systems, leading to declining morale and effectiveness among kamikaze units. American crews, conversely, experienced a dramatic improvement in confidence and combat effectiveness, as they realized that proper equipment and training provided genuine protection against even the most determined suicide attackers. The mathematical precision of radar-guided fire control had overcome the fanatical determination of kamikaze pilots, demonstrating that technological innovation could neutralize even the most psychologically challenging military threats. The broader implications of Meridian's success extended far beyond the immediate tactical advantages of enhanced defensive systems. The systematic defeat of large-scale kamikaze attacks at Luzon convinced Japanese military leaders that their most desperate tactical innovation could not achieve the strategic objectives that had justified its implementation. Intelligence reports indicated declining enthusiasm for suicide tactics among Japanese pilots who had witnessed the ineffectiveness of kamikaze attacks against properly defended American ships. The mathematical impossibility of achieving significant results against radar-guided defensive systems forced Japanese planners to reconsider their entire strategic approach to the final phase of the Pacific War. The failure of kamikaze tactics to inflict acceptable casualty rates on American forces undermined the psychological assumptions that had made suicide attacks seem like a viable military option. Japanese military culture had emphasized the spiritual superiority of willing self-sacrifice, but technological reality had demonstrated that determination alone could not overcome systematic defensive advantages. The strategic consequences of this realization rippled through the Japanese military hierarchy, contributing to growing recognition that continued resistance was futile against an enemy whose technological capabilities could neutralize even the most extreme tactical measures. The effectiveness of Meridian's innovations provided American planners with confidence that future amphibious operations could be conducted without the devastating casualties that had been anticipated from large-scale kamikaze attacks. The fleet-wide implementation of Meridian's defensive systems during the spring of 1945 transformed American naval capabilities and fundamentally altered the tactical balance in the Pacific War. Admiral Nimitz authorized the rapid installation of enhanced radar and fire control systems across the entire Pacific Fleet, recognizing that the demonstrated effectiveness of these innovations provided decisive advantages in the final campaigns against Japan. The massive technical undertaking required coordinated efforts by thousands of technicians and engineers working at bases across the Pacific, but the urgency of maintaining tactical superiority justified the unprecedented mobilization of resources. Ships that had previously been vulnerable to kamikaze attacks became virtually immune to suicide tactics, allowing American forces to conduct offensive operations without the constant threat of devastating casualties from enemy desperation. The psychological transformation was as significant as the tactical improvements. As American sailors regained confidence in their ability to survive and complete their missions, despite facing an enemy whose behavior had previously seemed incomprehensible. The systematic implementation of enhanced defensive systems also provided opportunities for continued refinement and improvement of the technology. As combat experience revealed ways to optimize performance and reliability under various operational conditions, Meridian found himself promoted to captain and placed in charge of a fleet-wide training program that ensured all crews could effectively operate the new defensive systems. His transformation from a maverick officer violating regulations to a recognized expert implementing official policy reflected the Navy's ability to adapt and incorporate innovation when tactical necessity demanded change. The final phases of the Pacific War provided additional validation of Meridian's innovations as American forces conducted the largest amphibious operations in military history during the invasions of Iwo Jima and Okinawa. The Japanese military's last desperate attempts to inflict decisive casualties on American invasion fleets encountered defensive capabilities that systematically neutralized even the most determined suicide attacks. The Battle of Okinawa, which Japanese planners had expected to demonstrate the ultimate effectiveness of kamikaze tactics, instead became a showcase for American technological superiority and tactical innovation. More than 1,500 kamikaze aircraft participated in coordinated attacks against the American invasion fleet, but the enhanced defensive systems achieved destruction rates that rendered the suicide tactics strategically ineffective. The mathematical precision of radar-guided fire control had created a tactical situation where Japanese determination and sacrifice could not overcome American technological advantages, fundamentally altering the strategic calculations that had made continued resistance seem viable to Japanese military leaders. The failure of large-scale kamikaze operations at Okinawa contributed significantly to the Japanese decision to surrender following the atomic bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, as military leaders recognized that even their most extreme tactical measures could not prevent American victory. The systematic defeat of suicide tactics demonstrated that technological innovation, properly implemented and supported, could neutralize military threats that seemed to transcend conventional military analysis. Meridian's unauthorized experiments had evolved into a fundamental transformation of naval defensive capabilities that contributed directly to shortening the war and reducing casualties on both sides. The post-war analysis of kamikaze effectiveness revealed the fundamental flaws in Japanese strategic thinking that had made suicide tactics appear more promising than tactical reality justified. Japanese military planners had assumed that American crews would be psychologically vulnerable to attacks that violated Western cultural assumptions about rational military behavior, but they had underestimated American technological capabilities and organizational adaptability. The emphasis on spiritual superiority over material considerations had blinded Japanese leaders to the mathematical realities of aerial combat, where technical advantages in targeting and fire control could overcome even the most determined individual pilots. The decision to organize systematic suicide attacks had represented a fundamental misunderstanding of how technological warfare actually functioned. As Japanese planners had focused on the psychological impact of individual sacrifice rather than the collective effectiveness of coordinated tactical systems. The failure of kamikaze tactics demonstrated that military effectiveness ultimately depended on systematic advantages rather than individual heroism, regardless of the cultural values that motivated individual participants. The strategic miscalculation had wasted thousands of experienced pilots who might have been more effective using conventional tactics that maximized their survival and long-term contribution to Japanese defensive capabilities. The cultural emphasis on death before dishonor had created a tactical approach that was psychologically satisfying but militarily counterproductive, as suicide attacks consumed irreplaceable human resources without achieving proportional strategic benefits. The systematic defeat of kamikaze tactics by American technological innovations had exposed the limitations of tactics based primarily on cultural values rather than mathematical analysis of combat effectiveness. Captain Meridian's post-war career reflected the Navy's recognition that technological innovation had become the decisive factor in modern military operations. His appointment as director of the Naval Research Laboratory placed him at the center of efforts to maintain American technological superiority in the emerging Cold War environment, where new threats would require continued innovation and adaptation. The principles that had guided his development of anti-kamikaze defenses proved applicable to broader challenges of defending against guided missiles, jet aircraft, and other technological threats that emerged in the late 1940s. His emphasis on mathematical analysis and systematic testing became standard procedures for evaluating new military technologies, ensuring that future innovations would be implemented more systematically than his own unauthorized modifications had been. The transformation of his career from maverick experimenter to official innovator reflected the military's growing recognition that rapid technological change required institutional flexibility and willingness to challenge established procedures when tactical necessity demanded adaptation. His work on guided missile defense systems during the 1950s built directly on the radar and fire control innovations that had proven so effective against kamikaze attacks, demonstrating the continuity between tactical innovations and strategic technological development. The principles of precision targeting and automated fire control that had defeated suicide attacks became fundamental components of modern military technology, influencing everything from air defense systems to space exploration programs. The broader implications of his work extended far beyond naval operations to encompass the entire American approach to military technology and strategic planning in an era of accelerating technological change. The historical significance of Meridian's innovations extends beyond their immediate tactical impact to encompass fundamental questions about military adaptation and the relationship between individual initiative and institutional effectiveness. His unauthorized modifications represented a challenge to traditional military hierarchy and established procedures that could have undermined discipline and coordination if implemented without careful consideration of broader organizational implications. However, the tactical necessity of responding to unprecedented threats justified exceptional measures that might not have been appropriate under normal circumstances. The balance between encouraging innovation and maintaining discipline remains a fundamental challenge for military organizations facing rapidly changing technological and tactical environments. The success of Meridian's approach demonstrated that individual expertise and initiative could provide crucial advantages when institutional procedures proved inadequate. but it also highlighted the importance of systematic evaluation and implementation of innovations to ensure their effectiveness across large-scale operations. The transformation of his unauthorized experiments into official policy required institutional flexibility and leadership that recognized the value of innovation while maintaining organizational coherence and effectiveness. The broader lessons of his experience continue to influence military thinking about how to balance tradition and innovation in an era where technological change creates constant pressure for tactical and strategic adaptation. The fundamental question of when individual initiative should override institutional procedures remains relevant for contemporary military leaders facing new technological and tactical challenges that require rapid response and creative solutions. The mathematical precision that characterized Meridian's approach to defeating kamikaze attacks revealed fundamental principles about the nature of technological warfare that continue to influence military planning and strategic thinking. His recognition that suicide tactics created unique targeting opportunities for automated systems demonstrated the importance of understanding how technological capabilities could be optimized to exploit specific enemy vulnerabilities. The systematic analysis of radar capabilities and fire control algorithms that made his innovations possible represented a new approach to military problem-solving that emphasized quantitative analysis and technological optimization rather than traditional tactical formulations. The success of his radar-guided defensive systems proved that complex military challenges could be solved through careful application of scientific principles and engineering expertise, providing a model for future technological development in military applications. The integration of multiple technological systems into coordinated defensive networks established principles of system integration that became fundamental to modern military technology development. The emphasis on automated response capabilities that eliminated human reaction time limitations foreshadowed the development of computer-controlled military systems that have become essential components of contemporary warfare. The mathematical modeling of tactical situations that enabled precise prediction of enemy aircraft trajectories provided a foundation for the complex computational systems that now support military planning and operations across all services. The broader implications of his technological approach continue to influence how military organizations evaluate and implement new technologies in response to emerging threats and tactical challenges. The legacy of Meridian's innovations in anti-kamikaze defense systems provides enduring lessons about the relationship between technological capability and strategic effectiveness in military operations. His demonstration that systematic technological advantages could overcome even the most determined individual opponents established principles that continue to guide American military strategy in contemporary conflicts. The emphasis on precision and automation that characterized his defensive systems became fundamental components of modern military technology, from guided missile systems to drone operations and cyber warfare capabilities. The recognition that technological superiority could neutralize unconventional tactics and psychological warfare techniques provides important insights for addressing contemporary asymmetric threats that challenge traditional military approaches. The systematic approach to innovation and testing that emerged from his work established procedures for evaluating and implementing new military technologies that continue to serve as models for contemporary research and development programs. The integration of individual initiative with institutional support that characterized the implementation of his innovations demonstrates the importance of balancing creativity with systematic evaluation in military technology development. The broader strategic implications of his work highlight the continuing importance of technological innovation in maintaining military effectiveness against evolving threats and tactical challenges. The fundamental principle that mathematical precision and systematic analysis can overcome even culturally motivated tactics provides enduring guidance for military planners facing unconventional opponents who employ tactics designed to exploit psychological or cultural vulnerabilities rather than achieve direct military objectives. Captain Thaddeus Meridian retired from active naval service in 1957, returning to his family farm in Nebraska, where he spent his final years applying the same systematic approach that had revolutionized naval defense to the challenges of modern agriculture. His neighbors remembered him as a quiet man who never spoke extensively about his wartime service, but who approached farming problems with an engineer's precision and a scientist's curiosity about cause and effect relationships. The technological innovations he had pioneered in anti-aircraft defense found civilian applications in agricultural automation and precision farming techniques that improved crop yields and reduced labor requirements across the American Midwest. His correspondence with former naval colleagues revealed continued interest in military technology development and strategic planning, but his primary focus shifted to the peaceful applications of systematic analysis and technological innovation. The medals and commendations he had received for his wartime service remained in a drawer, rarely displayed or discussed, reflecting his characteristic modesty about achievements that had contributed to shortening the Pacific War and saving thousands of American lives. His death in 1973 prompted retrospective analysis of his contributions to naval technology and tactical innovation, but his most significant legacy remained the systematic approach to military problem-solving that had transformed American defensive capabilities during the final phase of World War II. The principles he had established through his unauthorized experimentation and systematic innovation continued to influence military research and development programs decades after his retirement from active service. The broader historical context of Meridian's innovations reveals their significance in the evolution of military technology and the changing nature of warfare during the 20th century. His work bridged the gap between traditional naval tactics based on manual operation and coordination and modern automated systems that rely on computer control and mathematical precision. The transition from human-centered to technology-centered military operations that his innovations represented became a defining characteristic of contemporary warfare, where technological advantages often prove more decisive than traditional measures of military strength. The systematic defeat of kamikaze tactics through technological innovation provided early evidence that unconventional military approaches could be neutralized through superior technology and analytical understanding rather than simple firepower superiority. The mathematical modeling and precision targeting that characterized his defensive systems established foundations for the guided missile technology and automated defense systems that became crucial components of Cold War military strategy. The integration of radar, computers, and automated weapons systems that his work pioneered became the basis for modern military technology across all services and operational environments. The emphasis on systematic testing and quantitative evaluation of tactical effectiveness that emerged from his innovations influenced the entire American approach to military research and development in the post-war era. The transformation of individual innovation into institutional capability that characterized the implementation of his defensive systems provides a model for how military organizations can adapt to technological change while maintaining operational effectiveness and strategic coherence. The enduring questions raised by Meridian's experience continue to challenge military leaders and strategic thinkers who must balance the need for innovation with the requirements of discipline and coordination in large-scale military operations. His unauthorized modifications to standard equipment and procedures violated fundamental principles of military hierarchy and standardization, but they also provided crucial tactical advantages that contributed directly to American victory in the Pacific War. The tension between individual initiative and institutional authority that his case represents remains relevant for contemporary military organizations facing rapid technological change and evolving threats that may require unconventional responses. The success of his innovations demonstrated that exceptional circumstances may justify exceptional measures, but it also highlighted the importance of systematic evaluation and careful implementation of new technologies to ensure their effectiveness across diverse operational environments. The balance between encouraging innovation and maintaining discipline that his case required continues to challenge military leaders who must create institutional environments that support creativity while ensuring reliability and coordination. The broader implications of his work for civilian society include questions about how large organizations can adapt to technological change while maintaining their fundamental mission and operational effectiveness. The systematic approach to problem solving that characterized his innovations provides lessons for addressing contemporary challenges that require integration of technological capability with human judgment and organizational coordination. As we reflect on the story of Captain Thaddeus Meridian and his revolutionary approach to defeating the Kamikaze threat, we encounter fundamental questions about courage, innovation, and the nature of military effectiveness that remain relevant for contemporary challenges. His willingness to violate established procedures in order to save lives demonstrates that true military leadership sometimes requires the moral courage to challenge authority when institutional approaches prove inadequate to protect those under one's command. The mathematical precision that characterized his defensive innovations reveals the power of systematic analysis and technological innovation to overcome even the most psychologically challenging military threats through superior understanding and application of scientific principles. The transformation of his unauthorized experimentation into official naval policy illustrates how individual initiative and institutional flexibility can combine to create military capabilities that exceed the sum of their separate contributions. The systematic defeat of suicide tactics that his innovations achieved demonstrates that technological superiority, properly applied and systematically implemented, can neutralize unconventional threats that seem to transcend conventional military analysis. The broader strategic implications of his work highlight the continuing importance of innovation and adaptation in military organizations facing evolving threats and technological challenges that require creative solutions and systematic implementation. The legacy of his achievements extends beyond their immediate tactical impact to encompass fundamental principles about the relationship between individual courage and institutional effectiveness that continue to guide military thinking about leadership, innovation, and strategic planning. The question that his story poses to contemporary military leaders and citizens alike remains as relevant today as it was during those desperate months of 1944. When faced with unprecedented threats that challenge established procedures and conventional wisdom, do we have the courage to innovate and adapt, even when doing so requires violating traditional authority and accepting personal risk for the greater good? The answer that Captain Meridian provided through his actions continues to inspire and challenge those who must make similar decisions in defense of freedom and human dignity. Would you have broken the order or obeyed it? Comment below and share this story so others remember what courage really means when everything depends on one person's willingness to think differently and act decisively in the face of the impossible.